Okay, so it is 2:05. So I think it's ready I think we're ready to get started here. So as I mentioned, I'm Sam Novi. I'm Director of Full Participation Programs at National Conference on Citizenship. Our mission here at NCOC, we are helping, grow and cultivate and support, a network of local leaders all across the country who are committed to full civic and political participation in their communities. And we build that community based on the commitments of people like you in the network who learn from each other and share resources about what is happening in your community and ask for the help you need to be successful. This work is hard. It is really tough stuff to try to include everyone in democracy and civic life in our communities. So if you need help, raise your hand. There's somebody else in this community who can help you out. And if you've learned something awesome that you think other people could benefit from, please raise your hand too, because we got to share knowledge, share what we're learning. So super excited about our presentation today, which is a great example of that. And please do reach out to me personally if you have anything that you need or you need to share, because this network is going to be here to be both a platform for you and to support you in any way you need. As I think Jamie's mentioned before, and as a lot of you know, we've been hosting these learning circles most Wednesdays at 2 p.m. And they just give folks in our community an opportunity to learn with each other and connect around a topic of shared interest. It's been such an incredible privilege, to learn and grow together. It's been, I guess, almost 6 months of these things since the start of the pandemic, and we really welcome your ideas for new programs. So if you have something you're working on that you want to share, if you have seen something that inspires you, please let us know, because we'd love to host a program on that in the coming weeks and months. So I want to introduce our speakers for today, because it is a really exciting set of folks, and I'm really excited to learn from some of the incredible work they've been doing in the state of Alabama. So we've got Dr. John Giggy. He is director of the Summersell Center for the Study of the South at the University of Alabama. We got Ms. Margaret Lawson, a graduate student in education and history at the University of Alabama. Ms. Delphia McGraw, a history of U.S. alumni and freshman at Spelman College. And then Ms. Noah Jordan, a history of U.S. alumni and freshman at Howard College. And they're going to be telling us about a really exciting program they were been a part of called History of Us. It's inspired by the work of the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama. And it was the first Black history course taught every day, all year in a public high school in Alabama. And the way the program works, it frames national themes in local Black history so that when students studied slavery, they studied the lives of enslaved people in Tuscaloosa. And when they examined segregation, they explored how the color line was drawn in their own hometown. So it really took these issues that we often talk about at a national level and talked about how it really looked right in their hometown in Tuscaloosa. And one of the main projects was also research the lives of local lynching victims and build a digital memorial to them, building on the incredible work in the state of Alabama by the Equal Justice Initiative. So I want to pass it over to Dr. Giggy to share a little bit more about the program.
Thank you, Sam. And let me begin by thanking Jamie as well for inviting myself and members of my team from Alabama here to address you this morning. It's really a great opportunity for us to share our vision. And for me also, just to, at some point very soon, step aside and let you hear the voice of students who were very much the center of this class. As Sam said, this class was called History of Us, and it was designed with several goals in mind. First, we worked with over 12 community partners to create a deep and broad setting of community support for a different kind of class. By different, I mean, not only was this the first class to offer a full year of Black history, we tried to teach it differently. And as Sam said, the goal was to draw Black history locally. And so every large theme we talked about, we tried to show how it operated not only in the state of Alabama, but in the town we live in, Tuscaloosa. The goal ultimately was to move from the national to the local and eventually get to the personal. So we were striving for ways for students to see themselves in history in very profound ways. What we're looking for is sort of two operational goals. One is, could we move our students from being consumers of history to producers of history? That is, so often our students are talked to. We wanted them to be actually engaged in creating history. As a corollary to that was to move them from being young intellectuals themselves, give them the tools to talk, to imagine, to write powerfully, move from being young intellectuals to being public intellectuals. So the class pivoted multiple times to ask them to teach others about their work, whether it be by designing February as a Black History Month designed by them using social media. So each student has a day where they want to talk about what Black history means to them, or whether it mean actually taking the class and teaching it to other people. Our class was cut short because of COVID. We ended though with the kind of possibility that I think a class like this can do. We were on mass incarceration, and we had moved from lynching into structures of modern day prejudice and policies. And two things happened. One was, as we were moving through this unit, one student literally stood up and said, we can't, we have to do more with this. And the class was designed to allow for that and encourage that. So we actually pivoted the structure of it, and we spent a few more weeks on mass incarceration. The other piece of this was students recognized that many of them had members of their family in the system. And this became the first time ever outside of their homes that prison life or incarceration made sense historically, but also began to evoke their own lives as to how their lives would be impacted by generations of history. I'm going to pause here and actually turn it over to my students right now to begin to talk about how the class affected them. I'm going to begin with my co-creator, my grad student, Margaret Lawson, then we'll move to the actual alums of the class, Del and Noah. Ms. Lawson?
Yeah, and then we were going to share a quick slide just to re-emphasize some of the things that that Dr. Gigi and Sam so eloquently have put. Again, this class was designed to take national themes in Black history and frame them locally, frame history locally. A line that Dr. Gigi and I often tell our students is that we believe studying local history produces local leaders. And that has been like a core value that we have taken through this class and a lot of the work that we do. A huge tenet of this course is community engagement, because we believe that in order to make that transition to becoming public historians, to produce a product like these students produce, creating a digital memorial to the lives lost to lynching in Tuscaloosa, that work is not done alone. It's not done in isolation, and we have to push it outside of the classroom. So that's why this presentation today is really special to me, to have one of our community partners, Gabrielle from the David Matthews Center. I also saw Justin in the call here to talk about what it meant to construct this project from the ground up and build those networks across Alabama that allowed us to think about history differently. But I'm going to pause right there, because I think in some ways me and Dr. Gigi are the least interesting, part of this call, and we're going to pivot this conversation to Del and Noah. And we're going to start off by just talking to them about why they chose to take this course at Central High School, and then how it has affected them moving forward, or what has it meant to them moving forward in their careers. So I'll start sharing the screen. And Del, Noah, we'll let you guys take over.
Okay, so my name is Delphia McGraw, and I'm a freshman at Spelman College. So really, I was introduced in this class my junior year from one of my theory of knowledge teachers. She introduced me to Dr. Gigi and Ms. Lawson and a couple of other students, and asked, were we interested in a lynching course next year? And so, of course, I was interested. I mean, it was like nothing we've ever, heard of in school or whatever. And that's really how I just got into the class.
Hi, my name is Noah Jordan, and I'm a freshman at Howard University. The way that I heard about the class was actually after it had already started. I think I heard through like the principal or something, and instantly, like as soon as the class started getting media coverage, my parents were like, "Oh my gosh, this is a Black history course. Like your grandmother integrated her school. You need to be in this class." And so instantly, I was just like, "Okay, let me go talk to my teachers." And so I was actually a last edition, but I'm so glad that I chose this course, because like for so many reasons, I think it's like changed my life for the better in the way that I look at things now, and even why I chose an HBCU. Like I could go on and on, but that's just to answer that question. That's how I came about joining the class.
All right, so for Noah and for Del, tell us a little bit more about like how the class affected you, right? We talked a lot about how a good history class can make you see the world differently, but a great one will make you live in the world differently. So how did you react to the class, and how did it begin to make you think or live differently?
So personally, I was really interested in the class from like, a lot of people weren't really interested from the very beginning. It was a lot of research with our victims, and it was a lot of hard work to do. We had to go through, you know, records, and we had to read a lot of stuff, and it was just a lot of work. And it was a lot of like things that we couldn't understand how it connected to us. It was still just us learning about slaves and like the horrible things that were done to African Americans. So, but I enjoyed that part because I do like researching in the history part of it. So I knew already, like, I really liked this class. And once we got more into it, we started to like progress into the present, I guess. And we started to see the same instances that we saw in our history, in our past, in the same like now, I guess. And so it was just like it was more aha moments for everyone. It was more like, this is what you were trying to get at from the beginning, from the start. And that's how it kind of like, how we got to the end of that class, how everyone was like, oh, we need to do more mass incarceration, because they were so invested by that point. They were like, I understand this is my life and this is my family's life, you know. And that's why I was invested, and that's why most of my classmates are invested.
Absolutely. And the thing is, like, students of color, we're descendants of people whose history was intentionally hidden. The rigor of the research that we were doing, it only emphasized the importance of our work. Like, this is valuable. Of course, it's going to take much more than what we're used to, because the reality is, if we're looking up like some events or some things that happen in American history, we can find that easily with a Google search. Our history was purposely erased, purposely not written down. Our ancestors weren't allowed to read and write. They were kidnapped and enslaved and forced to, you know, work, and forced to be traumatized. And that happened for hundreds of years. And we couldn't, like, students of color, we cannot trust the American school system to document our history. So this class was honestly like so pivotal, because we've never seen anything like this, especially in Alabama. So yeah, I mean, I'm grateful because it's something that I needed, but not only I needed, but the people around me needed, and we didn't even know that we needed it. So.
And her saying like, we couldn't trust them to document our own history. I mean, our history, we were documenting our own. We were finding our own family history in this. And I'm sure like a lot of the classmates, didn't your friend, or that's off subject, but we just, you know, we found like a lot of our own stuff in Tuscaloosa history, because we're from Tuscaloosa, our families are from Tuscaloosa. And so one thing that really got me was hidden history, and how we learn our family history. And family is so important to me, and that's why I keep bringing up my family history. It's just like, because I am from a Black family, that history was erased. So at Spelman, you know, something that I took from this class into Spelman was seeing me in everything I read, and every historical text that I read. And it's hard because what we're reading are what they said, what the United States has told us to be stories, African stories, but this is African historical text, and I have to change my point of view and see it as my family, see it as my people in this moment too, not just stories in ancient Africa.
Absolutely, for sure. And thank you for the comment about my braids. Someone just commented, so now I feel cute. So absolutely. One thing that this class also emphasized for me was how do I say this? So historical fiction in the American school system, how we thought that we were learning American history, but when we talk about it in a history class, how, oh yeah, slavery just kind of happened and then it magically disappeared and Black people were okay again. That's the narrative that we were told. That's what we were trained to believe. But this, for a lot of students, not myself, just because I feel like my family kind of equipped me with like the skills and the understanding that like you need to value your history. Like you're not supposed to, so that's exactly why you need to value it even more. I think that with that, like we were in a space where we were realizing like, oh, this is a lot to take in, but also this is important, and this is why this is important, and this is what this looks like now. And so this was honestly unlike anything we had ever seen before. So for sure.
Let me jump in here a little bit with you, Del and Noah.
Yeah.
Is this class too hard for high schoolers in some ways? This was a common refrain from many, many people, not only in Tuscaloosa, but from around the state, that can you teach high schoolers to think about slavery? Can you ask them to draw links from their life to some of the most violent moments in American history? So what do you think?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, so yeah, I don't think it's too violent. I think I say this and every time we get this question, and it's because we're already living this. It's already happening to us, where it's our reality. It's like this was our grandparents' reality, our parents' reality, and now people being shot and killed in the streets and being incarcerated is our present reality. So honestly, teaching us this is the same as you teaching us American history, but not glamorized. And so I just think, and we're adults. I mean, we're 15 to 18 years old in high school. We can take, some information about people hurting other people. We see it in our everyday news. Social media is everywhere. Y'all cannot, or not y'all, but people cannot, censor us. They cannot like baby us at this moment. We cannot, if you want us to progress into world-changing adults, you have to let us see what's really going on, see the truth, I guess.
Absolutely. And for sure, whenever we get this question, it just speaks to like why this class is so important. Like we can't understand our history or fathom why things are the way that they are on our own. And the lifestyle that comes with being a person of color or a Black American today, even, like that's much harder than knowing, oh, my ancestors were enslaved. Like we need to know these sort of things. We need to know that our ancestors were lynched. We need to know that this was public knowledge. People knew about this and still didn't tell us what was going on. People knew that horrible things were and are still happening. Just for example, like I remember when the George Floyd murder happened, I kept saying it on the news. I kept saying it on Facebook. I kept saying literally active trauma being inflicted on someone who looks just like me. Like I'm having to consume that every day and still live and exist and still be a productive person and still just exist and be okay. But that doesn't look any different in my eyes for me. Like that doesn't look any different than like a bounty poster for a runaway slave. That doesn't look any different from Rodney King being beaten nearly to death by the police officers. Like that doesn't look any different to me. So I feel like our trauma and the impacts of an attempt to, I guess, progress with white supremacy and in the process hurting the African American community, that's literally being rubbed in our faces. And so we can handle that, but we can't know why. That's a problem for me. So this class is absolutely necessary for every single student in the country.
And this is just like a comment, like that was amazing, that was a lot, but literally on like Daily Mail, you can go and get a warning. It's like flash warning, a snake, a tarantula, oh no. But then you go on and it's a Black man being shot with no warning. You just see it immediately. And that's not traumatizing, but I can be traumatized by a tarantula or a snake, oh no. It's like, okay, y'all have desensitized real life things that are happening, and that's unnecessary.
For sure. And it's a normalization of dehumanizing Black people and Black existence and Black history and just Blackness as a whole. Like Black people did not ask to be here. I think that we forget that also. And so, yeah. Let me let y'all ask questions because I'll go on and on.
Yeah, I think we are. Thank you, Del and Noah, so much for really asking us to think differently about how teaching history can make you think about your own life differently, think about American history differently. I know that was about our time, so I know we're about to transition into, I think Gabrielle is next. I'm sorry, I don't have the document up, but share the floor for some questions. And
Yeah, so we're gonna go. So first off, can we just give a shout out to the Dr. Gigi and Margaret and Noah and Dell and the incredible work that's happening at University of Alabama. This is in History by Us. It's just a really exciting program. So thanks so much for sharing that with us. Our next speaker is from the David Matthews Center for Civic Life. So for those of you who don't know, it's been such an honor and privilege at NCOC to work with and serve the folks at Matthews Center for Civic Life. It's in Montevallo, Alabama. We've worked with them on their Civic Health Index for a number of years. They serve all of Alabama's 67 counties through programming focused on building skills and habits and capacities for more effective civic engagement and innovative decision-making. They've been doing incredible work on civics education, working with educators and schools and higher education institutions and municipalities to develop avenues for youth civic engagement. The programming goes beyond, just character education and just learning about active citizenship, but actually, equipping young people with 21st century civic skills that allow them to, have really meaningful opportunities to make an impact in this like new shifting world we're in. I just want to take a quick question, but before we do this, just for the white folks on this call too, I've had a very powerful experience myself learning about my own family's history in South Carolina and thinking about, where, some of the lynchings that occurred where my family was, and thinking about, as I'm a Jewish American, and I often thought, well, were we really a part of this? And as I lean into this history, I've had to engage with that a little more. So I'd encourage, the white Americans on this call to also be thinking about your history too, as we do this. I want to hand it over to Gabrielle to share a bit about the David Matthews Center.
Thank you, Sam. Let me pull this up really quick. So like Sam mentioned, I work as the Education Director at the David Matthews Center for Civic Life. We are privileged to serve all of Alabama's 67 counties. I'm especially privileged because I get to work with the wonderful educators around our state and many of their students. So our programming focuses on a few different things, but most importantly, encouraging deep civic learning. So sort of like Delphia was talking about earlier, if you expect students to be engaged and active citizens, both when they're young and when they grow up, you have to get them immersed in this now, whether it's learning about the history of their local area, difficult contemporary issues, and talking about and valuing their perspectives on what is happening to them and in their community. So a lot of what we focus on with social studies education is applying civic knowledge, but also just developing the civic knowledge, so really immersive experiences with students in their community and with local history. We also develop resources. I'll share a little bit about that, but a big thing that we focus on is deliberative discussion in the classroom. So our resources invite students to consider citizen choices. So what type of choices did citizens make in history? What type of choices can we make now in our communities? And we want to encourage them to have a sense of responsibility and efficacy. If their voices are valued in conversations about what is happening and what has happened, they will know that their voice will be valued when they're in their community, and they will be prepared to share that voice. And finally, equipping educators. So we ultimately want our educators in our state to be these sustaining practitioners of civics and social studies ed. So we love to work with them to help develop these resources and provide professional development, but we know they have tons of power to really bring this into their community and direct these things. So I mentioned we have Teachers Institutes as our professional development that incorporate deliberative discussion, place-based learning, and action civics. So they help teachers both learn the skills they need to implement this, as well as how to develop it themselves. Students Institutes that engage students in building the future of their community, and youth forums that equip students with deliberative skills. And this is a little bit of what we did with the History of Us class. So when we talk about deliberative learning, what are we talking about? We're talking about inviting students to consider historic and contemporary issues and events from many perspectives. So it asks students to either put themselves in a place in history or put themselves in the midst of a contemporary issue, whether that is bullying, economic development, mental health issues, immigration, and consider multiple approaches to the issues at hand and consider the cost, consequences, and trade-offs. So ultimately, we ask students to find common ground, but also acknowledge that common ground will have to be found. There's no perfect solution. Whether you're talking about history, there's always going to be complications, as well as with a contemporary issue. So ultimately, ask students to consider history not as inevitable as the result of a series of choices. So we also, when we're developing these deliberative guides that help students have these conversations in the classroom, we want them to be very localized and place-based. A lot of what Ms. Lawson and Dr. Giggy were talking about with making history local is something that's very important to us as well. So even though we want to create guides that help students walk through the decisions citizens had to make during women's suffrage or during the 1963 civil rights movement in Birmingham, we want to make them centered on those decisions. So in Birmingham, what did the women's rights and women's suffrage movement look like in Alabama? And many teachers began requesting a few years ago, they really wanted to start talking about Reconstruction in Alabama. As many of y'all can imagine, I mean, Reconstruction is a topic that is really poorly taught throughout the US, but especially in our state. There's a lot of challenges in teaching this because there has been pushback about having discussion about this in the classroom. So many of the teachers we worked with said this is a topic they really wanted resources on, they really wanted a discussion guide for. And we begin the process of developing these by gathering a bunch of historians around the state together, community members, to start outlining, well, how might we have this discussion? So after we had done some initial research about it, we thought we really wanted to have this discussion from the perspective of recently freed people in the state. It is a hidden history, it's an invisible history, it's often not acknowledged. And even, you know, sort of like Delano were talking about earlier, a lot of history books treat this time period as sort of Reconstruction happened, and then people had these freedoms they didn't previously have. But there was so many challenges that they still confronted, you know, and that they still confront as a result of enslavement. And we felt like we really needed to elevate that in the resources we created. So we had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Giggy and Ms. Lawson because of one of my colleagues, Justin, had worked on a different project with them. And we met via our Civic Institute 2 summers ago. And they said, we have this History of Us class that's happening. We'd really like for the students to go through the experience of learning how to have just difficult conversations in general, and perhaps becoming moderators in their community and how they can do it. But then once we started actually discussing what the students would be doing in the class, we thought this is a wonderful opportunity for us to really practice what we always preach, which is that students should be at the center of, you know, these immersive experiences and decisions in their community. Well, now they can be at the center by being historians in the construction of this. So I'm going to drop this in the chat as well later for anybody who'd like to look at it. But as we developed the Reconstruction Guide, we worked really closely with the students in the History of Us class. And really, they are scholars and historians, and they helped us by creating these lesson plans that went along with the History of Us, or with the Reconstruction Issue Guide, that had to do with those that were freed and the search for family members. Noah and Del, would you like to share a little bit about what that experience was like?
This was a lesson plan that was inspired. I'm sorry, Del and Noah, if you guys want to jump onto this. It's inspired by the, do you remember when we were researching the runaway slave ads in Tuscaloosa? And it's basically what we did is we used newspaper resources from the Library of Congress and then also from a digital history project to basically do research and look at what are these newspapers that are tracking. In the case of Delano, they were researching runaway slaves. But then for the Reconstruction Issue Guide, we flipped that model and said, what does it look like for families, Black families who are trying to reunite after the tragedy of slavery? So it's very much inspired by Delano's work. Dr. Giggy, is there anything you wanted to add to that, or Del and Noah talk about that experience?
I'll let Del and Noah handle that one.
All right, can everyone hear me? Can I get a head nod? Okay, awesome. So yes, our research was, again, very intense. And one of the activities we did was looking through some newspaper clippings for some runaway ads. And so what I can remember specifically about that assignment, just because we did so many of them, was the language that was used and the narratives that were painted for the readers, and the direct attempt to demonize and right, also sexualize just African Americans, and how I guess not only the newspapers but people just in general would make it so obvious that they wanted Black people to seem like monsters. And so it's how do I say this? It speaks directly to like much bigger issues. And so what I like about this class is that it taught me that it's so much more than, Black people were seen this way in the country. Why were they seen this way? What was the direct attempt to dehumanize Black people? What did that allude to? Why was this system created? So what does this mean in a non-physiological way? Also, just back on enslavement, like this class also taught me to look at just enslavement differently, because when we get so caught up in the physical aspects of lynching and just the fact that people were hung from trees, and then after that their bodies were literally torn apart, and when we also, I guess, reduce slavery and just that time frame in general to whippings and lynchings, we lose the value of what this did to a people psychologically. Like, what did this do to them systemically? What did this do to us? How does this benefit our country today? How does this system framework our education and how we think about people and policies and structure? Like, this is such intense work, and it's so necessary, because how do we expect to get better if we don't hold ourselves accountable for our history?
Yeah, thank you so much, Noah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that you brought up the power of language that we saw in these runaway slave ads, and the way that there is a legacy of that in the way that we think about criminality today, the criminalization of Black men today. And I think you're so right that we can't, make this a one-dimensional issue. It's so much more than that. And that's why, so what you guys just witnessed right there was how these lesson plans grow and expand. And how we took that lesson plan and activity that Del and Noah piloted in the History of Us class, and we actually made a corollary to that for the period of Reconstruction, to continue to expand the way that we think about the power of language, both to be a divisive force, to be a criminalizing force, and then also in the case of the lesson plan Gabrielle is talking about, it's from the Last Scene Project, and it's how Black families resisted this power of language, how they tried to reunite after slavery. So understanding those things and holding them in tension is exactly what we're trying to do with this history. And we would not have that lesson plan without amazing conversations like the ones we're having right now with Del and Noah.
Yeah, I mean, all of this experience was just a testimony to the fact that we talk a lot in the field about civics education, about getting students immersed and active in, learning and practicing civics in their community. But this can be applied very widely to the entire social studies realm. The product that we came up with and the resource that we came up with would not be what it is without the work of the students in the class. But also there's just so much space for them to be scholars as they're also learners. And, Ms. Lawson and Dr. Giggy did an excellent job flipping the classroom environment in a way that, we often advocate for, where the students were both teaching and learning simultaneously and really just co-creating the class along with them. So that is all that I have to share at the moment. We can move on to questions if you think that's appropriate, Sam.
Can I speak on
Yeah, go for it.
the resistance of like families resisting this type of language and things? I just think we can honestly see that in how people have viewed prison and going to jail, because it was such a hardship. They loved, like going to prison, and so many people went. And then once the civil rights movement came around, it was also like almost like a rite of passage. It was like you did something for your community because you went to jail to outlast this system, I guess. And so like I don't know, I can't remember the sitting, but it was like a group of people sitting in a dining place, and they all went to jail, but they all chose, instead of paying the $40, to go spend their however many months and however many weeks in jail, all of them together as a unity. And you can see that as like a progression of us resisting what this world has tried to give us, you know? And that's all.
Great. So I want to transition to question, but can we just have another round of applause for for everybody involved with this program? It's just so cool and inspiring. Appreciation to everyone. So I wanted to do two quick shout outs while we're on the topic of deliberative learning and helping people learn by thinking about historic choices, because there's two awesome opportunities to get engaged right now, and then we'll get to both reflections and questions and sharing. So first off, I want to shout out the Made by Us campaign, which we've been partnered on with the Smithsonian Museum of American History, and they are doing some really interesting work with a lot of the incredible historic sites we have in this country, all across America, to help people engage with history in these types of dynamic ways. Coming up on our 250th anniversary, the Declaration of Independence in 2026. So that's really exciting stuff, and a really great chance for us to kind of take stock of these last 250 years and think about how we make the next 250 years, a more just and good thing for our country. So really excited about history made by us. And the other thing I wanted to shout out is the scenario planning workshop. So, we're living through some history right now, obviously with this, extraordinary election, this pandemic, and we've been at NCOC developing scenario planning for helping people think through what would we do, if, certain types of challenges were presented in our communities, both before and after the election. And we've actually been working with the Smithsonian and Made by Us to work with historic sites to have those types of conversation. So if you're interested in doing that kind of deliberative learning in your community, please reach out to myself and Jamie and the Made by Us folks. We'd be happy to set that up for you. And then Margaret sent me a private message that all the research.
I'm sorry, I meant to set that to the whole chat. But I was just going to say the research that Del and Noah were talking about was donated to, for them, it ended up becoming like a digital humanities project that they shared with the community. But the Last Seen project is designed to, at the very end of the project, have students donate their research. So moving from consumers to producers of history, challenging eraser in history by writing your own history. So that was supposed to be a chat.
No worries. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's really inspiring. And I hope we'll all reflect on kind of how we can engage with our own history, our own community's history, and then share that with others in our community, because it's such a powerful way to, this network is all about local leadership, right? So knowing our local stories, knowing our local history is so important, and I think it's such an inspiring example of that. So we got a ton of great questions on deck, so please, let us know in the chat if you want to ask something. I first want to go to Andrew from Generation Citizen, and he wanted to share a little bit about, what they're working on and the way they've been inspired by this work.
Absolutely. Just want to say a big thank you to the great work you all are doing at the University of Alabama and with the Dave Matthews Center, History by Us. This is powerful, profound work. Dale and Noah, as a HBCU graduate, I heard you all talk about Spelman Howard. I'm a Hampton alum. I just really want to shout you all out for sitting in that profound heritage that you all rest within. Just very quickly wanted to share that we have been working along with a number of folks across the country on equity in civics education with Gabrielle at Dave Matthews Center in particular, to do this kind of immersive learning and to be a part of not just being students of history, but as you all have shared, being makers of history as well. And a part of what that work has looked like is a listening tour in 7 cities across the country to figure out how racial equity can be placed at the center of civics education. And it deals very much with these questions. How do we not only understand the past as it comes to us, but how can we leverage the past as a tool for pushing ahead on the future? How can we make sure that civics is not just rote learning, but the most exciting and engaging course in the classroom? And so a part of where that work can potentially engage folks on this call, we're finalizing some of the results of work and research that has emerged from Harvest, Alabama, and other places into a white paper that's going to be released next month. And there'll be some accompanying materials to help make alive that conversation. But again, just really want to celebrate the work that y'all are doing at NCOC in Alabama, and can share, I suppose, with you, Sam and Jamie, more about how folks can plug in there.
Great, and yeah, we'll definitely share out more about Generation Citizen. They've got a lot of networks in all 50 states, right? So if you're looking to get involved with Action Civics, looking to get involved with participatory history, deliberative learning, Andrew and his team are really well situated to help you do that. So I want to elevate a couple other questions here. Dr. Tariq, an assistant professor of history and program coordinator at Elizabeth City State, asked, how can I create more student-centered learning? How can I get my students involved in programs like this? So, obviously there's the resources Andrew just mentioned, but is there any, folks on the panel, is there anything that comes to mind when you hear that question?
I think Dr. Giggy can give some great examples, and Ms. Lawson from their class. I will say, from my perspective, having worked with many communities and schools, I think the key is just treating students as equals in the learning process, and giving them a lot of permission to design that experience for themselves. So their class is focused more on a very specific topic in history, but we also work with communities to create these action civics opportunities in their actual schools and cities. And that is something that is really imperative to making that happen, is making sure that whether it is having a presence in city council meetings or being present in other areas of government or city events, that people really value their input. And make them also central to the experience. Is there anything y'all would like to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add. I think you're right, Gabrielle. This notion of student focus is critical, and students should be brought in at every level of the planning and design phase, not just as the very end, but ask them straight up, what do you want? What do you need? How do we change things for the better? The other piece of this, though, is to spend equal time with community partners, because this class would not have been possible had we not worked with the David Matthews Center, but also local SCLC chapter, NAACP, Stillman College, HBCU local here, University of Alabama, the mayor's office, the Chamber of Commerce. Each of these people allowed us to show how deeply invested we were in the student success. So it's both student focused, but also community broadly engaged. So you have more of a wraparound experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say one of the challenges of designing a class like this that is based around local history is that every local, classroom is going to have its own story, its own set of networks of community partners. So getting plugged into those, like even if it starts out with the public library, they have been such a huge help, like doing oral histories for your community, something like that, having a public facing dimension, finding those people in your community that want to connect history and leadership and start bringing those together. We have lesson plans that we've designed that we share these resources that are designed, to, transfer from local community to local community, but there's nothing that we can tell you about, like, who are the community partners that you specifically need. We can try to help connect, and I'm sure in this talk but that's something that I think the blueprint is something that you create with your students, with yourself, and it's continually growing and evolving.
Yeah, I would kind of just add to that, if you need a good starting point for who are those community partners or folks you should be talking with, try to bring your students in on an asset mapping exercise. So actually breaking down like who are the human capital and the human assets in your community that are really involved with making things happen or have a lot of knowledge about the community and the history of the community. That can be a good place to start building what those partnerships are.
Great. So I want to go to our next question here, or next reflection from Amani at University of Delaware.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Yeah, my name is Amani. I'm presently attending the University of Delaware. I major in energy and environmental policy, and I focus a lot of my worries toward sustainability. However, also in my college careers thus far, as I am graduating soon, I've been crossing over a lot of civic engagement work, as I have been raised in the same town that I go to university in. I noticed a lot of correlation between, being involved, but also kind of the value that comes from mutual involvement. And a lot of this conversation has talked about, the value of student-centered learning and further education. And a lot of that's really inspiring to me. I also wanted to say a huge shout out to Del and Noah. You guys are literally not, more than an inspiration, but you are the ticket for a more just society for us. So shout out to y'all, keep it up. And I'm rooting for you out here in the first state. But yeah, my work has centered around civic engagement work with students. And I guess my major point here is that, focusing on a locality, there is really, really an important stake in having a connection between, in my case, the town that a university's in and a university. And so, I really, that's my observation and in my experience, how important that is to have that connection. And presently I'm working on building that through having intergenerational town halls, and through, getting everybody that's locally, engaged and organized in conversations about where can we get these polling places that are local, connected to the student body, right? Because there's now students here that are from a lot of out of state, and there's a lot of complications that come with voting particularly. And so a lot of my engagements revolve around that, but it's important. And I think this conversation has launched me into a whole realm of excitement, because now I know I'm not alone in the reality that, we need to be focusing locally in a way that's looking to the past, to refer to the future, and act in the present. So I really appreciate you all, and this has been a really cool call.
Awesome. Thanks, Amani. Any reactions from that on the panel before we go to the next question?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that huge compliment. And also, I'm so glad you said intergenerationality. That was actually a trigger word for me when you were just talking about this class being student-led and inspiring other classes to do the same thing. We actually had such a unique model in this class, unlike anything I've literally ever seen before. And I had been an IB student since literally the 4th grade. I went to a magnet school from 4th to 8th grade, and then went to Central, which was a full IB diploma program. And I had never seen any sort of model. I can honestly say that I won't forget anything I learned in this class, but I'll probably still forget most of the stuff I've learned in IB for the past 10 years or so. But anyway, back to intergenerationality. It was a trigger word because we literally planned out what we were going to learn. We didn't even know what we were going to learn, but we planned it out as students. They allowed us to pick out what were the most important values to us. And for us, those values were education, justice, and intergenerationality, how we wanted to use this knowledge to educate other people outside of the classroom. What did this look like in our everyday lives? How can we use this to frame our decisions to help other people, that sort of thing. And then justice, just not forgetting what we're doing this for, what is the purpose. Also just not forgetting anyone, and just the importance of not only the lives lost, but what else was left behind? How were their lives taken? Why were their lives taken? What was the bigger picture? And then intergenerationality. We didn't want this to stop at this classroom. We didn't want this to stop in 2020. We wanted this to go on. We want to see other classes like this in the future, hopefully never ending, So that was really great that you said intergenerationality, because it brought me back to the first day of class, which I wish I had the picture and I could screen share it right now, but we were literally writing on the walls, what do we need to get out of this class? And I've never seen that in a classroom. What do I as a student want to take away from the, see, okay, this is what I'm talking about. Seamless transition, thank you. But absolutely, so we're literally writing on the walls, what do we think is most important? What can we gain from this? What do we want as students? As a student, I'm not going to want to remember what you're teaching me if I don't feel connected to you and what you're saying at all, if I don't feel like you care about me. And this just made me feel so many feelings. It was wonderful.
And to very quickly just jump off that, I'm so glad you had that experience in the class, because something that we talk about with especially civic engagement in Alabama is we have a very real issue of brain drain, and a lot of rural communities have this, and rural states, and that, you know, the young people leave, and we really think that having these experiences where they get to identify what they love and what is special about their community and its culture and its history encourages them to stay engaged with their community and maybe even consider staying and helping build it into the place that they want it to be.
Great. So we got one more shout out I want to give from the chat, and then a final question to close on. Bunny sent in just a shout out. She's the ED of a really cool nonprofit called the Fascinating Learning Factory. They do all sorts of educational programming, and they've developed a really cool thing called the Guerrilla Guide to Politics that tees up a lot of these issues, and that's a great resource. I just want to elevate Bunny's work here, and we'll drop a link to that in the chat so y'all can check out what she's doing, and maybe we can in a future learning circle we can talk a little bit more about some of those resources. So I want to close on the question from Mildred Hooks in the chat, and this was for Noah, but I think any of the panelists, if you want to weigh in on it, it was, how do we define systemic racism, and what would a world look like without? What can we start to do to imagine the kind of world we want to see?
Okay, so systemic racism, in my opinion, is just, like a racial caste system. It's really a state where African Americans have been pushed into believing that they're an inferiority, and allowing things to happen in workplace and the school place that are just microaggression to them. So I think that's what that is. But for us to change it, really, it's really to acknowledge it, because that's something we don't do. It's something we're just now starting to do, which is amazing. But really, I have something else to say, but I'm gonna let Noah go and I'll come back.
Okay. So in my opinion, I feel like systemic racism is, it's like a machine. And I know that's like weird, like, girl, what are you talking about? But it works over time, and it's so not black and white, and it's so not about feelings and about how much this group of people hates this other group of people and how they're like somehow equal and how they're like feuding or something like that. It's so much more than that. And I feel like oftentimes and intentionally, the American school system and just how we document history in general, we paint it as a picture of like, oh, we're just so caught up in these feelings and how people feel about other people. It's not about that. It is a machine. It is a tool that is used to socially, politically, and economically demonize, control, and censor Black people. Like, this is not at all about how people feel about each other. And so as soon as we start to like acknowledge that and see how this works today in policy and how this looks, even as far as like people having the needs, like people having the things that they need. So I've been doing my own little study on like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how people think and how people feel and why they make the decisions that they do. Studies show that like if people don't have what they need physically, then they probably won't have what they need psychologically, and they probably won't have that self-actualization. Like, and you can't even expect a group of people who have been demonized and racially targeted in the way that African Americans have. Like, you can't even expect some African Americans to even care about our history. Like, this machine, this tool, systemic racism, it works. It's so intricate and it's so intentional. Like, and so as soon as we start to realize and we step out of ourselves and we step out of the feelings and even the cruelty of it all, we can see like how it literally is a tool and how it still works and how it will continue to work if we don't have these conversations, if we don't acknowledge it, and if we don't start making some changes. there are going to be some people who will have to feel really uncomfortable in a society where systemic racism doesn't exist, because not only does it hurt Black people, but it benefits other people.
I also think it's like the exclusion of Black people in media, the exclusion of Black people in history, in powerful positions, and that representation of us being something more than that we are represented as, because Black people aren't represented, and they just, especially my sister works in the media, and she always talks about how we are not represented correctly anywhere, on movies, on social media, because we're always criminalized. We're always demonized. Yeah, what no one keeps saying, and it's just for us to have some generational change, for us to have growth. We need to represent Black Americans differently, educationally. We need to represent them in ways that are realistic and not the built, the fabricated one that has been in America since the beginning of our, existence. So, or in America. So, yeah.
Absolutely, for sure. And then just also education. Like, education is not only the key to success, but also access to resources. Like, Central is a Title I school. There's really no reason why like this was supposed to happen. If we're thinking about systemic racism, and we're like, this goes against everything that is supposed to happen in America. And that's why I love it so much. Like this class itself is like a resistance piece. And I'm so glad to be a part of this movement. Like, this is like totally pivotal. And so access to this knowledge is just like, it's something that you can't pay for, and you won't. Like this, the value of this is just so precious to me. So yeah, for sure. A world without systemic racism, I don't know. I don't know how that would look as a minority, but I think it would look a lot better than what it looks like right now.
If I could jump in the last 30 seconds, in many ways, Noah and Del are demonstrating the absolute. Good. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So what I want to end with is that in many ways, Noah and Del are representing or actualizing the highest goals of education. Because as I'm sitting here listening to Noah and Del talk about systemic racism, the mutability of white supremacy, they said it as eloquently as I've ever heard. And in many, many ways, we trust our students to use Gabrielle's verb to teach us. If we equip them with the right tools, there's a Del and Noah in every school in America right now. We just have to sort of ask the questions, how do we get them to this point? How do we get them to lead like they're doing right now? It strikes me that that's one of these critical questions that NCOC, all of us are really thinking hard about. But in the end, the product is what we see today. People like Del and Noah imagining the next generation, calling out systemic racism, and dedicating their lives in each HBCUs to leading the next generation of truth and truth seekers.
Great. So let's give just another round of applause to the presenters today. I think they did an incredible job. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Try to do something that makes you uncomfortable today. I know that with the encouragement is to do something that might be hard, and just know that you're not alone in doing something hard. There's people all over America trying to have these hard conversations. They're in this network. So reach out for help if you're having a hard time. I know it's difficult to have these conversations a lot, but it's absolutely necessary. And we are here to support you in that. So with that, I want to close us out. Thanks so much for being here with us. Next week, we've got a great learning circle on the work happening in municipal governments all across America to drive full participation. So I hope you'll join us next week on Wednesday at 2 p.m. with some great excitement there. And thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate all y'all being here with us this afternoon. See you next week.